And I'm very excited because we're going through a series called what?
Meneutics.
I love what God is doing in His church, in His community, and in your lives. And I want to affirm that in your life. One major thing in our city, in our culture, in our country, in Africa, in the world, that the church has not done well is how we treat our women. Yes? Women are either second class or are not allowed to do stuff even in the church. So the church stands on the pulpit and preaches love, just a little less love for women. And we're like, no, that's not right, because that's not what the Bible says, right? The love of Jesus redeems us from the traps of culture. When culture says women should not do this, should not do that, the love of Jesus walks there and says, she's mine. She belongs to me. And we live in that culture that uses scripture to even do that, to support what our culture has told us. Now, when you think about hermeneutics, it's basically the art and science of interpreting scripture. And all we're saying is, when the Bible was being written, what was in the mind of the guy that was writing? Why did God invite that man, that woman, to use those specific words at that time, in that season, in that context? What was God addressing? Because scripture does not mean what it never meant before. When you open your Bible, it exactly means what the intended guy heard, what God wanted. There are things we learn, there are things we wrestle with as time has gone on. But the reality is that's what scripture. So what we're doing in this scripture, we're taking passages of different women that God used over time. We're looking at them and saying, what does it mean to be a woman after God's own heart? What does it mean to be a man after God's own heart? Now, I know I've been saying this, but I'm going to say it again. No matter what your theological background is, but I'm not going to be a pastor that stands and tell women what it means to be a woman, when our culture hasn't even done that work. I'm not going to do that. Because there are women God has raised in His church, in His city, that are actual women of God. And as a community, that's what we want to do. That's where we want to learn. That's where we want to learn. That's how we want to learn from other women that God has raised in His city, in His church, in His community. Because God has raised these women. God has empowered these women. God is changing and using these women. So please, my encouragement to us in a culture that wants to have all these weird connotations about women, can we open our hearts and be challenged to hear from what God has taken them through? Can we do that? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Now, before we do that, I'm going to call this woman of God, Oprah, and just play this one song. And when they're done, I'm going to invite Theo to pray for her, and we're going to get into the word. Yeah? Can we do that?
Yes.
So we're going to do that song, Fill Me Up. You can sit down, but I want you to prayerfully sing this song. Don't just do it, you know what I mean? I want you to prayerfully do this song. I want you to prayerfully surrender. I want you to prayerfully sit down and just meditate on what God is inviting us to. Can we do that? All right, let's pray. Jesus, speak to us this morning. Fill our hearts, fill our minds with your word, with your truth, with your love, with your kindness. And fill us with anxieties, fears, pride, frustrations, or things that culture has shaped us to think. For the sake of your name, I pray that you be exalted and that we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
You provide the fire.
pioneers. I love to use pioneers because she partnered with us when we were planting this church. And I remember Theo from way back in the day, like, I'll just say it.
Yeah.
She was one of my friends when we were in college. Later on, she was one of my students when I was lecturing in college. And she's one of the most hardworking women, very passionate women that love Jesus. Not only loves Jesus, but loves to invite other people to knowing and loving Jesus. God has called her to do something extraordinary that I really, really love and enjoy. She's full-time getting into ministry that invites other women to receive counseling and prayer from the abuses they have gone through. So I really, really appreciate her life. I appreciate what God has done and what God is doing in your life. Right now, she's a head presenter for Pablo FM. Yes? Yes, and I'm very glad and grateful that she's here. And I'm going to pretend that she's not scared, but just pray for her. Can you just stretch your hands towards her with me? Holy Spirit, thank you this morning. Thank you for the honor and the privilege to know this woman of God. I pray, may she step out of anything that is not from you and step into her call, her anointing, and her place in you. And when you speak through her, may we hear you, Lord. May we not just look at Theo as Theo, but may we know you're using her this moment for the sake of your name and for the glory of your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, show us some love one more time.
I'm going to be that person. Okay. I'm Theo Chapeta, as the pastor said. And I'm here with my husband and children. They're in the audience. I'm kidding. For those that don't know me, I do not have a husband and children. I'm Theo. I was born in a family full of girls. I have two sisters, two biological sisters, but we were raised as 6. And when I say 6, it's loosely 6 because that number kept increasing as the years went by. So roughly about 9-10 girls in one house. And when I say 9-10 girls, I'm including my mom in there. So I have half brothers, but that I'm not exactly in contact with. But so my upbringing was just full of women. So I was surrounded by women. But the funny thing is that even being surrounded by women, I saw my mom be, remember last week, Andy talked about Deborah being an all-rounder, a woman that does everything. That was my mother. She was raising 6+ kids. She was doing school during my younger years, her master's at MIM, and she was holding down a government job, doing all these things by herself. My father passed when I was about 7 years old, but even before then, he wasn't really in the picture. So I saw my mom do everything by herself. So basically, I wanted to be my mom, because for me, that is what a strong woman is. You do everything by yourself. And then I went to school, and I can remember as early as standard 2. During my standard 2 to standard 4, I have that story our parents tell us. I was number 1 in class all the time. Yeah, I have that story for just those years. I will not lie about the rest. But during that time, one thing that stands out for me in that period was that our teachers told us girls, you can do it. You can beat the guys. You can be number 1. You can be everything. And that was great. That was really great. I went to a really progressive school, so that was really great. But the thing that happened there was when us girls succeeded, and the top 3 was only girls, and then the 4th one was a guy, we were celebrated. But the men were shamed for being beat by girls. When it was the other way around, we didn't receive any shame. It was just, you can do better next term, you can beat the guys. What I didn't realize at the time, that from a younger age, what society had been telling me is, you're in competition. You need to fight. You need to fight for the top. Fight this guy that is next to you, not the girl, but fight the guy that is next to you. At least that's my personal story. And I know it varies with different people. But basically, the world at large has been talking about equality for the longest time. I've been saying, oh no, we need equal rights. Women need to, sit at the same table with the men. And that's true, that's great. I actually am 100% for it. Except that the most important institution that should be championing this has been silent. The church. There are more women that have had scars from church than scars from the world. And also, I will not neglect, because there are more men that have had scars in the church than in the world. The place that's meant to give us healing has brought us pain. Pain that ends up translating into God. We may not like certain things about God because those are the certain things that we faced in the church that we thought God did not shield us from. But today I'd like you to let go of the pain, just for this time. And if you want to pick it up again, that's fine. But for this time, could we let go of what we have heard, what society has told us, what has shaped us, and just listen to what God wants to hear from us for a little bit. So, today we're looking into the story of Esther. She's one of my favorite women in the Bible. I think one of the first women I knew about, strong women in the Bible, was Esther. But we're going to read a lot of verses from it. But let's start off with Esther chapter 2. And we'll start from verse 5. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in the custody of Hegai, Esther was also taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to be the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. When the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go to the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. We're going to go to chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. And he carried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city, in the front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai what Esther said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Amen. Now, the story of Esther basically, fortunately or unfortunately, you can't read it in one chapter and get everything. You would have to go through the entire book. So I'd say, like the pastor, read your Bibles. But the thing about Esther is she was a young girl. They describe her as a really beautiful girl. And her uncle basically was the one taking care of her. But before chapter 2, we hear of the king had a wife, and he threw a big banquet displaying his kingdom's wealth and stuff. And then he asked the queen to come into the presence so he could show off his queen to all the people. But the queen refused. She didn't want to go. So then, what they did was, that was not allowed. You couldn't say no to the king, but this woman did. And basically, that turned into a law of no woman ever should ever say no to her husband. That's what in turn it translated to. Now when you go on, the king now needed a wife because this wife had disrespected him, and so he can't go on. So basically sent out, the edict and said, I'm looking for a woman, a wife. And so all the beautiful young women were gathered into the king's palace. And that's where we find Esther, in the king's palace. They basically were there for 1 year, grooming them for an entire year. Oils, body, castor oil in their hair and stuff, all that jazz. That was happening that entire year, just so they could get to the king, present themselves, and the king gauges, yeah, I like you, or no, maybe just tonight, but not the rest of the other nights. And the thing was, on the final day, when you had to go to the king, you were given the choice to choose whatever you wanted to wear, jewels, everything was on you. It was your choice. But here's the unique thing about Esther. Esther decided on the last day that she would not choose, but she would ask the man who was in charge of all the women for advice. Basically, through the book of Esther, we see a woman partnering with men and bringing about God's glory. And that, I believe, was God's intention. It's been perverted over the years, therefore we have women being oppressed, even in the church. But that was never, ever God's intention. Basically, through this partnership, we see Esther rise to authority or success because she honored a man's position. Think about Haggai for a minute. Haggai was the king's eunuch who was in charge of the women. But she entrusted her beauty, one of the most prized positions in the entire country. Her success, she basically put it in the hands of a man. Because if this man told her rubbish, basically, that was the end. She wasn't going to be the king's wife. But she, in turn, looked at a man, looked at his position, and said, okay, I'm going to take in the advice you are giving me right now. Because that's the position that this eunuch was at. So basically, the first thing that we're seeing in the book of Esther is the partnership, but not just any kind of partnership. It's a partnership that honors. We're calling it a partnership that honors because when a woman decides to get advice from a man on things concerning a woman, that's kind of weird, but that's where God placed her. He placed Haggai on that position to know what beauty tips to give the women, to know what foundation goes with what, to know what's the best makeup, what's the best jewelry, what does the king like. He knew because he had been at that position for the longest time. So basically, Esther did not look at this man, which I believe did not look at this man as a man, but rather as the person God had put to help her. Because if the first thing we consider when we look at a person is their gender, we are at a loss, guys. We're at a deep loss. Because how many times have we not taken advice from a person because they're either a man or they're a woman? So we refuse. They might speak, but we will shut off and be like, I don't understand. I don't think that's right. Just because that particular person is a man. So we need to get to a place where we can honor each other. Because that's what partnership is. That's what womanhood, manhood is. Because if God thought, hey, women, you can do it by yourselves, and men, you can do it by yourself, I don't think we would be together in this room. Maybe there would be a man island and a woman island, and so we're all just living our lives. Maybe we would have been men in Mars, women in Venus. But that's not God's intention. But honor also comes from a place of love. You cannot honor somebody who you are degrading. You cannot honor somebody who you think is less or doesn't deserve what you have or doesn't deserve anything in the world. You cannot honor that person. And if we can't love each other, then we are failing as the disciples of Jesus. Because Jesus said, you will know them by their love. Love honors. Love does not degrade one or the other. So basically our main concern shouldn't be which gender can do it better. Because if that's what Esther went by, she would have just been another girl, part of the crowd, tossed off. It should be about who God has placed around you with the influence to help you rise to the person He made you to be. I get it. There are certain things women have to learn from women, and men have to learn from men. But if I can't learn from the men around me, I will not go far. If men, you can't learn from the women around you, you will not go far. Because we were created to be partners. From the Garden of Eden, partners. Now there's something else that we also see through the book of Esther, which is we're meant to partner in obedience. So walk with me in chapter 4, where first we find the crisis. From chapter 3, there was a man named Haman, who was basically the king's right-hand man. And this guy hated Jews, all because of Mordecai. Well, that little incident there started because of Mordecai, who was Esther's uncle, yeah? Because he would not bow down to Haman when he was passing by, which was what most people would do. So he hated him, and in turn hated all Jews, and said, I want to kill all the Jews. And basically pledged an insane amount of money to that particular cause, and managed to convince the king to say, we need to obliterate all the Jews. We shouldn't have them around. So during that time, that has happened. The edict is out. There is mourning amongst the Jews because they're like, hey, this is it for us. They're going to kill us. And it was at the end of the year, they were going to kill all the Jews. So basically, Mordecai, as is custom with the Jews, puts on sackcloth and ashes and is wailing, because that was basically their way of weeping. And he's wailing, and he goes to the king's gate crying, because that's where he was day in, day out, because he knew his niece was in that palace, wailing. So Esther hears about this and says, hey, I want to know why my uncle is out there wailing. So she sends people to go and ask him. And he tells her, hey, the king has put out an edict and we're all going to die. There is nobody who's going to survive from this. We're all going to die. So he makes a request. That's in verse 8. He makes a request and tells him, go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for the people. He makes a request. What's Esther's response? She says, but all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that anybody who goes into the king's presence without being called upon dies, unless the king is delighted in you and actually holds out the golden scepter, and then you will be saved. But otherwise, that's it for you. You are dead. And she had not been in the king's presence for 30 days. Pretty much almost a month she wasn't in the king's presence. There's speculation as to why she was not in the king's presence. Other scholars actually say no, because she may have fallen out of favor for that time from the king. And others say no, but because he had concubines. He had concubines all around, so hey, he would choose. But either way, that was the case. It's logical, right? I can't go because you know the rules. But Mordecai says to her, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. It's verse 13 and 14. And then in verse 16, after Esther hears this, she says, okay, go and gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. We see Mordecai making a request. We see Esther's first initial response, which we could say she was a little fearful about his request. Go to the king? Dude, I haven't been to the king in 30 days. I don't want to die. But Mordecai continues to prompt her and say, no, you should. Because who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Then Esther makes the plan and says, okay, let's fast a little. 3 days. No food, day or night. Which eventually she then goes to the king's presence. But what we see here is Mordecai calling out the courage in Esther. He showed her what she could do, what she could be. So we see that both genders were made to call out greatness in each other. Men, we do need you to tell us, hey, you can reach, you can go. That sounds a little bit far off, it sounds a little bit outdated, because right now we're saying, no, just every woman for herself, and she can do this and she can do that. Yes, but we weren't made to do it without you. It's a partnership. We were made to walk together. And not just in marriage, but we were made to walk together. Man calling out greatness in woman, woman calling out greatness in man, which is what we saw last week when we heard the story of Deborah. She tells the man, hey, God says you are to go and fight. It was his own fault that he said, I'm actually just going to go if you go, which wasn't what God said. But she called out the greatness in him. She called out what God said about him. He should go. Which is exactly what Mordecai saw in Esther. She is at a place of influence. If there is a person who actually can save this nation, it's that woman in the king's palace, the wife to that king. Partnership. Seeing greatness in people and actually calling it out. But then we also see Esther now rise up and give out the plan. She lays it all out and says, okay, this is what we're going to do. If I had a tambara or a kwaja, for every time I have heard people bash down plans because a woman suggested that plan, I'd be richer than Bill Gates right now. But why is that? Why is it that we see her as less, as her as somebody who cannot give out a plan, somebody who God can't give a plan to and say, hey, go and do this, this, and that in that particular kingdom, in that particular workspace, in wherever, even in the home? Why have we in turn looked at a woman and said, you can't do it? What got us to this point of the woman can't do it? When clearly, Esther's the one who called the shots in the end. Mordecai tells her, I think you should go to the king and plead with him. He would have said, when she says, oh, make sure, go tell all the Jews to fast. He could have said, no, I'm telling you to just go to the king. Go to the king. But he didn't. He went ahead, went and fasted 3 days. Told all the Jews, fast 3 days. He knew her influence. He knew her position. And as a matter of fact, he calls it out and says, who knows that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? So it's not about who is giving the orders and creating the plan. It's about who God has appointed to give the order and create the plan. I don't care, woman, if it's a man above you that has created that plan. And I don't care, man, if it is a woman who is above you who has created that plan. Point is, if it's God's plan, go with it. Run with it. The point is partnership. Woman, if you are at that position of influence, use that for good. Man, if you are at that point of influence, use that for good, and that's to elevate each other, to elevate the greatness in each other. Another interesting thing is, as women, we have been told so much, go out in the world, succeed, do what you can, be what you can be. But somehow that has translated as, if what you want to be is a wife in the home, that's wrong. That's not success. If you want to stay home and raise your kids, that's not success. Go get money. Maybe even be the breadwinner in the home. Then we celebrate those women. But the ones that choose to stay home, because that's where God has placed them. That's where God is calling them into. That's what God is calling them into. We shame them. But here is God using a wife. Esther was a wife to the king. That was her influence, being a wife. So being a wife, being married, raising your children, that's something to celebrate. And if that's what you want, go for it. Because how is creating a family or being in a family something that we shame? Why is that something that we shame? Especially for the woman who wants that. Somehow it's been labeled as the tiny ambition. Like the woman who is in that space has no ambition at all. But is that true? If that's where God wants them to be, is that true? So God used a wife to influence her husband, to actually feed her husband. That was Esther's plan. In the following chapters, you see her actually inviting the king to a banquet and says, hey, could you please come and dine with me? And by that, at the dinner table was when he said, ask me anything you want. Even half this kingdom, I will give it to you. Maybe the way to a man's heart is really his belly. But that's what Esther did. That was the grand plan. Dinner. Host him. So, if that's how much influence Esther had over her husband, why is being a wife a bad thing, ladies? Why is it a bad thing? Why is being in the home, hosting your family, a bad thing? I don't think it is. And I don't think God thinks it is. But when we move on when we go back to the earlier verses of chapter 4, in verse 4 to 6, Esther basically looks quite oblivious to the events. Now imagine, this is an event that's happening in the entire nation. The killing of the Jews. The edict has been put out. All the Jews, it says all the Jews are in mourning. But Esther somehow wonders why her uncle is crying. What was happening in that palace that she didn't think to say, he's crying because he's a Jew and I'm a Jew and we're going to get killed? No, but somehow she was fine. She was fine in that palace. Quite all right. Now, unfortunately, that's the place where we as the church find ourselves, in this little bubble, in this little palace, where we have created the rules and we aren't speaking greatness in people. In this case, greatness in women. We aren't calling it out. But here's the thing, when the most important institution in the world stays silent, people find other places to get answers because everybody's looking for answers. It won't matter where they get them. So basically, at this point, the world has been telling the church what equality is. Because we have chosen to stay silent. We have chosen to continue on with the oppression culture. The world, in turn, has decided, hey, this is what's going to happen. This is what equality looks like. But I'll tell you one thing. And you can take it or leave it, but equality, the way the world has preached it, is taking away from us. It's taking more than it's giving. Because what we are told is that the man is your competition. Devour him. And if you can't get to that position that that man is at, you are nothing. That's not empowerment. And in turn, we have said, women, go and be a go-getter. Go and do everything that you're supposed to do. Go and be great. And we're leaving the men behind. And telling them, shut up. Because you have been at this position for the longest time. Now it's our turn. That's not how it's supposed to be. That takes away from us more than it gives. Yes, it gives a little bit. We can celebrate the strides that we have made when it comes to women empowerment. Yes, let's celebrate that. But when you look around at the damage it has also caused, we, the church, need to apologize for staying silent and letting destruction come through when we can stand up and do something about it and show the world this is the intention. This was the intention. Whether you believe in Big Bang Theory or you believe in a higher power, this is what the intention from creation. There is a God out there, a God who created you and me, created two genders, a man and a woman in a garden to be together. He created the man alone and said, no, he can't be alone. It's not good. And creates the woman. So they partner together. If he saw that it was okay, maybe he would have just created the man and left the woman out. But he didn't do that. It's a partnership. And if we can't show the world what partnering means, what walking together means, and I don't just mean in marriage, what walking together means, it could do so much for our world right now. The wounds that have been caused, because when we have been empowering women, we have been degrading and emasculating the men. That was never God's intention. God never said elevate one against the other. or fight for a seat at the table. If we are all God's children, which means we're already in the house, we're already at the table anyway, so what are we fighting for? What are we fighting for? We should be fighting to show the world what it truly means to be a woman and a man in the world, working together, because that was the initial intention. Work together. If we show the world how we can partner together, how we can live together as women that know their purpose and men that know their purpose and elevate each other, what good we can do in this world. Such good we can do in this world. So who knows but that you have come to this position for such a time as this? Who is above you, lady? Who is above you, man? What is God calling them to do? And also, who is beneath you, woman, and who is beneath you, man? That God is saying, could you pick that person up and pull them up? But because, no, women empowerment, you decide to stay quiet and not elevate that man. Or because, no, there's too much women empowerment, let that woman stay silent and be quiet. Those are not the responses that God has wanted for us. So who knows but that you have come to this position for such a time as this? Who knows that you are a woman of influence in your place for such a time as this, to elevate humankind, not womankind, but human. Who knows, man, that you have come to this position to elevate humankind? I believe we're all at places of influence. They're children that need to be taught what true equality is, what true equality in the eyes of God is. That doesn't see, check first, are you a man, are you a woman, and then let's go. No, it just says, are you with me? Let's go. So I pray that may, because I am a woman, or because she is a woman, or because he is a man, never be our reason for not doing God's work. The Great Commission is too big, guys, too big for us to be picky about these things. What we need now is all hands on deck. Let's go. The world needs us. It's crying out. It's time for us to take a stand and move. So woman, yes, you are empowered. You don't need to fight. Yes, man, that woman's empowerment says nothing about your own. You are just as worth it. So let's walk together. Let's move together, women, and be that all-rounder, that plan A, that prophetess, that wife. And men, if there are positions you need to stand by us, please stand by us. If there are positions you need to be at our backs and push us, push us. If there are positions you need to be in front of us and say, stop, think. Stop us. We are all loved by a great Father. If he is both our Father, why are we fighting in this house? Why are we degrading each other in this house? Why are we saying you are less than? Because if we tell a woman she's less than, technically you're telling her, you know, God actually may have just made a little bit of a mistake with you. And women, if our levels of empowerment is to actually degrade the man, then that's exactly what we're telling the men as well. So as we finish, I'd like you to think about that. Say yes to viewing God's people. Viewing God's people as he views them. But also on behalf of all the women who have hurt you men, who have degraded you, who have made you feel less than, I apologize. It's not okay. It's never been okay. So we're going to take back our freedom today, as the worship team leads us in our final song. We're going to take back our freedom. Freedom to be men, freedom to be women, and freedom to partner together, knowing that we're on the same team. Let's go. Amen.
Please show us some love.